computer. So up there. So at least I'll start by saying welcome to the AMATIC Midwest Region Math Bonanza, and our website is amatic.org/Midwest. And I guess it might not be a bad thing that we record and share with the few people who might have to leave early or coming late or got confused by the wrong Zoom link. And so I am going to actually just stop my sharing here in a second, but if all of you want to maybe say in the chat where you are from or why you felt compelled to come to today's presentation, or maybe any thing that you maybe hope to get out of the presentation, then that will help our presenter maybe get to know everyone and why they're here. And I am going to, while I stop sharing, and Lori, our presenter, start sharing, I'll read a short biography about them. Let's see. Let me see if I can get your biography, Lori. So if you have something you want to share while I'm struggling, you can, Lori. But I am going to read this here. So Professor Chapman teaches mathematics at Macomb Community College in Warren, Michigan. They are active in diversity and inclusion efforts at Macomb, including work in the Macomb Full-Time Faculty Union, and they focus much of their time on working with students in developmental education courses, and they are anxiously awaiting the end of this pandemic so that they can see their students again. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to them right now. And thank you again, Lori.
Great. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to share today, and I hope everybody gets something out of it. So let me go into my PowerPoint. Let's actually share it first. Hey, that could help. All right. Okay, and I'm going to go here from my current slide. All right. So I've given this talk before, so if any parts of it sound like it's for a different kind of audience, that's probably why. So just, you know, the last time I gave this, it was for an audience of more social justice active administrators at community colleges. So I know it's a little bit different with y'all, but I'm one of you, so that's a good thing. Okay, so the title of this presentation is Sharing Our Story, Using Story Problems in Math to Foster Student Inclusion. It actually sounds like a really hopeful title, as if I have a lot of answers, and unfortunately I don't. What I hope for you to get out of today is a better understanding of the problem. You know, as good mathematicians, sometimes it's harder to actually state the problem appropriately than to actually solve it. And so that's what I'm really hoping to do here, is to help all of us be able to state the problem well so that we can actually start solving it. So again, some information here about me. I use they, them pronouns, and I'll talk about that in a moment when I get to that. So let me move on to my next slide. So like John mentioned, I spend a lot of time working with students in developmental education. And the demographics of students in those courses, they are a lot of students of color, students who are English language learners, students who have an immigrant background, students who are low SES, so socioeconomic status, and typically the people who aren't really well represented in college and not really well represented as college graduates. There was actually something I got yesterday about 4-year graduation rates in Michigan. of the gap between white and black students. And in about, I wouldn't say half, but a little less than half of the schools, that gap is growing in those graduation rates. So there's a problem here. And I think, you know, two-year schools like us have a big role to play in that. So I started becoming interested in this work of how do you get students to feel like they belong? And like you, I've tried just about everything. I've tried games, I've tried, you know, fun tricks, I've tried, you know, all kinds of attendance strategies. I've tried all this stuff to get students to feel like they belong, that they see themselves in that math classroom. And so I asked my students, you know, how do you feel about coming to class? And here's some of the responses I got. That there are no emotions involved, you just do what you're told. That you leave yourself at the door. That it's all about numbers, not people. This fourth one is the one that bothers me the most. I don't trust my answers. And that really bothers me because there's an underlying assumption that students are, first off, looking at problem solving simply procedurally. And on top of it, they don't understand what's going on enough to be able to say, I understand what's happening, to be able to say that this answer is right. And it shows a lot of, you know, issues within themselves. They have really low, you know, math self-esteem. And then the age-old, I'm not a math person. Oh, I mean, this is really sad stuff. You know, we're not trying to get people necessarily for everyone to go into, you know, engineering or calculus, even anything else. We're just trying to get people to be numerically literate and to be able to understand things in society, and more so, to not have math be a barrier. You know, that's really my big thing. You know, I just want my students, when they leave my class, to be able to do all the math they need to do, no matter what that is. So for myself, I had to really come to terms with my own feelings of inclusion and belonging before I could really start looking at what was going on with students. So I had to do a little bit of soul searching on my own. And some of the things that I've realized was, and I did a lot of work in looking at sociology and looking at workplace dynamic stuff, and found two sociologists, Sesh and Pham, out of University of Michigan. And they've done a number of papers and studies looking at STEM workplaces, specifically in the government. The government is one place in all those agencies that there's actually more diversity checkboxes than you would necessarily have on a census or in a private workplace. And one of the things they found among STEM-oriented government agencies was a devaluation of femininity and status biases related to normative expectations for normal or natural performances of gender. And so this is a great group of people, because I really want you to think about this, because it's rare to be in a math environment that is predominantly female. And this room is majority female, it looks like. And think about that. Think about how femininity is actually looked at in the mathematics community. And, you know, I always used to be one of those people who said, hey, all of these, you know, status things, all these identification things don't matter. We're just, you know, we're just all math people. That's the whole culture we have. but we all bring a part of ourselves. If we're going to be effective in what we do, we need to bring our whole selves to that. So, which brings me to some more stuff of my own. So 2.8 to 10% of mathematicians identify within the LGBT spectrum. And that came from Session Fam's research. The actual percentage has been measured in society as 3.4% of people identify as LGBT. That percentage is much higher among millennials and Gen Z. And that's where that 10% comes from. That 10% comes from Matt Voigt's research. He's at San Diego State, and I have his information at the very end of this. San Diego State, and he just published his dissertation where he studied queer representation in mathematics. And that 10% was him surveying his calculus class. I mean, you want to talk about convenience sampling right there. So I would probably lean more towards the 2.8% as being accurate. But the thing is, if it's measured as 3.4% of the population, it's definitely less within mathematics. So a marginalized population, which is already even further marginalized. But we have to be aware of it because the percentages are going up among our students, which is what's there in the 10%. And so in terms of me, myself, about a year and a half or so ago, I started coming out as transgender. So I am a non-binary person, specifically transmasculine. I have no expectations of you understanding anything of that, but I use they, them pronouns. And I put a couple websites here that give some more information about non-binary people. It's, you know, you can find a lot of stuff, but I'm also happy to answer any questions at any time afterwards as well. So you know, thinking about this and really coming to terms with my own lack of inclusion and belonging, and really thinking about this in terms of my students. I had to be honest with myself before I could be honest with my students and look at them. And for me, you know, I didn't bring myself into the classroom as a student. I got to shut it off. And that's what I wanted, because I hated myself. I hated who I was. And if I could shut that off and be a math person for that short period of time, what a relief that was. But you know, that's not a healthy way to live your life, first off. Secondly, not everybody wants to or should do that. And even more than that, I could hide it. I hid it for most of my life. And, you know, what about people who are marginalized in society and can't hide it and don't want to? You know, what about students of color? What about, you know, immigrants? What about, you know, any ableism, any of the groups that aren't what we normally see in our, you know, our upper level classrooms or among our colleagues? I mean, John and I have the privilege of working with John. We've worked for a long time. We work in a department that out of 7 people, there's an open position now, so there's 6. But out of those people, there's not a single woman. There is no gender parity. We can't even get gender parity right. What does that say to our students? So there's a lot really to unpack there. And again, I love that I'm in a room that is, you know, majority female, at least looks like. So could be wrong on some of that. Okay, so I started dealing a lot with, you know, my own, you know, as I was coming out myself. So again, that's, you know, been about a year and a half, 2 years now. Really finding a place for myself in mathematics. You know, I've been full-time faculty for 13 years and was an adjunct for a few years before that. So, you know, I've been around, you know, the bend a few times. But I had to spend some time searching for, who I was as a mathematician and also as a transgender person. So, and then figuring this stuff out for students. So I started looking at culture, right? I mean, when we get up in a classroom, we don't just stand there and say, okay, 5.2, number 13, here's how we do it. 6.3, number 24, here's how we do it. We give a story, we give explanations. We try to have some kind of culture there. But unfortunately, among a lot of people, they feel that there shouldn't be a culture in a math classroom, that we shouldn't have diversity, that we shouldn't have anything that is deviating from what's determined as the norm. And the problem is, you can't get away from it. The lack of what's identified as culture is a culture in and of itself. Just like the empty set is a set. So I started looking at cultural characteristics. And so I moved towards here. Okay. A lot of things I kind of saw in some sociological research, and I'm going to tie this all in after we do this. But things that I noticed myself within math culture. And these are kind of oddly worded because they're a part of a larger sociological framework. So there is a kind of a point to this. This isn't just stuff that I made up. So there is a larger theme tying this all together. And there's definitions to these. And so this is going to be the first breakout room. So John is my tech guru. So he's going to put people into breakout rooms. And there's going to be probably, I'd actually wanted 2 to 3. Let me see how many people are here. I'm not sure how many people are here. Okay, I wanted 2 to 3 people per breakout room. Awesome. So 14. So I guess we could do 2 per room, John, and just do the first 7 of these. But in the breakout room, you will be able to download a Google slide deck. And make sure, let me check the chat here. Okay, yep. So John has requested that you open it up before going to the breakout room. And so I would want group 1 to look at defensiveness, group 2 to look at either or thinking, group 3, fear of open conflict, you get the idea, right? We're really good at procedural stuff. Group 4, individualism, group 5, objectivity, group 6, only one right way, and group 7, paternalism. And here's the questions that I want you to ask about this. So there's a few questions here. 1, I want you to introduce yourselves to each other and try to get to know each other a little bit. And secondly, I want you to look at these characteristics that you're going to see on the slide deck and see where you recognize those. Do you recognize them as an employee in your department? Because employee well-being is kind of a big thing and doesn't get addressed nearly so much. Do you recognize it when you were a student or among your students now? Do you recognize it as a teacher? Right? As teachers, we are all leaders in a classroom. So some of these things that talk about people in power and leaders, when we're teaching, we're the people in power. We're the leaders. So, trying to recognize some parts of ourselves in that. So where we recognize them, in our department, in time as a student, and then as a teacher. And then lastly, so third question, I want you to tell your partner about something that you've done in the past 24 hours that brings you joy. Just something. Doesn't have to be math, can be math. this is the right room for that. But something you've done that brings you joy. Or a close approximation. All right, so you'll have 10 minutes in this breakout room, and each group, I'm going to ask each group to share some of those insights when we come back. So you may want to take notes and think about it as you return.
All right, so I think then I will be sending everyone to the rooms in a moment. Lori, you're a co-host now, so you can go between the rooms if you want to.
Okay, perfect.
And so I have the link in the chat, but I'll jump from room to room and put it in the chat in each room in case you missed it. So I have it set to automatically close after 10 minutes, and then I'll be back in this larger Zoom room. So
Awesome.
I'll see everyone in 10 minutes or so.
Okay. Everybody got in here okay. So I will leave if that's the case. And John,
Trying to figure out how to put my video on.
okay. I know,
There we go.
right? Hi, Kim.
I just came to put the link in the chat, but I think it already stays in the chat. So I will
Yes.
leave all of you alone. And I was
Okay.
in Steve's group yesterday, so I don't need to be with Steve again.
Oh,
right.
gee.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's not about need, John. It's about want.
And I
am the past president of Wismatic and was mostly here to support John, but now you're making me work, John.
I mean, I didn't, they don't assign me a room when I'm one of the hosts. So
Yeah.
I get to be in this room. The other rooms have 3 people, but
Okay.
but I mean, I don't remember the 3 questions except for the third the third one, but
Well, we were just on introducing. Angelina hasn't said where she's from yet.
Yeah, I teach at Marine Valley Community College in Palos Hills, Illinois.
Okay.
I just I taught high school for a while, about 7 years, and then I started at Marine about 3 years ago. So this is I'm just finishing up my 2nd year full time. So
Awesome.
very new in my career, but it's gone really well despite.
And it's a similar path. I taught high school for 15 years and then moved to the technical college, the community college, and I've been there 6 years now. So similar path.
Yeah, that's great. Are you happy you made this?
We have a Marine Valley in Wisconsin too. So when I hear that, I'm always like, Wisconsin or Illinois?
Oh.
All right, so we're objectivity, and we're supposed to talk about where we see it, like in our classes, where we see it in our departments, and what was the third question? Oh, something that we do that brings us joy.
Yes. Trying to think, objectivity.
Slide number 9, John.
oh, slide number 9. I see it now. Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I'll say yesterday I went out to eat for dinner, and I had a Hawaiian burger with, but it was a little bit messy because it had pineapple and pickles on it, which
Ooh,
I realized that most people wouldn't like that combination at all, but
Yeah, that sounds great.
on a cheeseburger, it tasted great. So it was nice to get out of the house for dinner. And there were only, every restaurant I've been to has only had like no more than like 6 other tables eating in. Like restaurants are carry out or delivery these days. So I kind of like the going in and it being a little bit quieter while I'm eating.
Yeah, I've been enjoying eating out, but it's weird when you're inside. I don't know, if it just feels weird. I would say in the last 24 hours, the things I did to bring me joy were I've been using Home Chef, which I've been really enjoying a lot. So I cooked a meal yesterday, which is I don't know, I enjoy it, and it's relaxing because everything's put together already. It's not that stressful. So that, and then always, hanging out with my animals brings me joy.
What animals?
I have 2 cats and a dog, a beagle.
Have you tried the other services and Home Chef is your favorite, or did you just start with Home Chef?
I tried HelloFresh. That's the only other service I've done. I wasn't overly impressed with the recipes. I'm a little bit of a foodie, so I just, I didn't think it was that great. But I have to say with Home Chef, I'm really impressed. Like some of the stuff I've made, I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I have to go out to eat anymore. So it's
Wow.
kind of nice.
Well, as long as you're doing a food theme, I'll stick with it. I was expecting John to do tacos, so nice to know you had joy from something that wasn't a taco.
Yeah, well, I think that like I've had to branch out lately because I found out some of the health problems I've been having because of being inside all of the time were from the change in my diet. So I have to have more of I've been told I have to sort of I haven't had canned food or frozen foods in probably 3 weeks, and I started to feel better every day. So,
Awesome.
so
Yay.
hopefully it continues to improve. But I've been.
I'm not ready to eat in restaurants yet, but I've been doing takeout to try to support some local businesses. And we have a local business that makes the most amazing BLT that I had yesterday. That was so good, with a sage aioli in the place of mayo, and it was amazing.
That sounds good.
If there were a couple of places I've been to where I thought that there were too many people inside, so I left. But when there's 6 tables total that they even are allowing open, I sort of feel like they're at least taking precautions, and that's the best I can do. I mean, it's not as bad as the one restaurant though, where, well, I don't know if this is good or bad, but one restaurant I saw was requiring people to bring their own tables and chairs even to sit on the restaurant patio. So they won't even allow outdoor dining unless you brought your own patio furniture with you.
Oh, man.
So I'm enjoying chatting with you guys, but I think we have to report out about
well,
what we
and,
talked
yeah, and while we've been chatting, I've been looking at slide number 9, and I'll say my thoughts real quickly. But
Go for it.
I feel like especially the last 2, the logical thinking in a linear fashion and impatience with any other way are big ones, because I always tell my students, it's not about a certain way that I want you to solve the problem, or it's not about just getting the right answer, because that's not what this is what we're about in this class. It's not a objective or neutral thing that we're working toward where there's only one right answer. I want you to possibly think outside of the box, apply different problem solving techniques. They might be guess and check, and then you go back and see where that answer came from later. I don't have any problems with my students doing that, but I feel like from talking to my students, I get that they hear those types of things in a lot of other previous classes that they've had in the past.
I think that's probably right. I think I definitely don't feel like I have these things in my classroom. And if I do see it pop up, I feel like I try to address it and try to place my, self in how my students are thinking. But I do think they've had that experience in other places. And I think that's important to be aware of, and to really try to foster comfort and confidence when they have our classes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my department, and there's a lot of talk about how before, there's a cohort of us that came in together, And before us, we always hear stories about how, oh my goodness, there was so much drama in the meetings. Oh my goodness, people actually cried during meetings. And like it's hitting that belief that emotions like have no place in what we're doing, and like they're contemptuous of people that brought emotion into the department conversations. And not that I want drama and crying in our meetings, but it's got that tone of, you know, emotions don't have any place here, so don't bring them.
Well, that's tough, right? Because we work with students. Our job, I think, is really emotional.
Oh, the students for sure. Good Lord, yes. And that's kind of Maslow, right? If you don't acknowledge their emotions and help them work through them, they're never going to be able to think logically.
Yeah, I think that's true. And being able to work past, you know, whatever they're feeling and try to get down to a solution or something to do.
I think we have to go.
Okay.
Oh, we got 60 seconds. We still have 60 seconds. Okay.
Yeah, I
Uh,
wasn't sure like if you would still get the 1 minute warning after the, like, because I set them to close after 10 minutes, but because
Yeah,
yesterday I was setting a timer and that
okay,
didn't
so
work.
what are we going to report out?
I think that like I like our discussion that about recognizing that students may have experienced some of these beliefs about objectivity in previous settings, and that because of that, taking extra caution to listen to our students and hear their experiences is important.
Sounds good. You're nominated.
Sounds good. All right, see ya.
Ten minutes is not a very long time.
I was worried it was too long. Okay. All right.
Feels long when you're going into it, and then it turns out to be way too short.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of things. Yeah. Okay. Let me see as folks head on in. Is everybody back, John?
I I think so, but I can't be 100% sure. So
Okay.
if somebody got lost, that's okay.
God, that happens at in-person conferences too. I just imagine someone like going through the hallway, you know. Okay. All right, so I'm going to come back as something in the chat. Okay. All right. So come back. So, all right. So I want to have the groups report out, and I heard that 10 minutes was not a lot of time, and I apologize for that. I was worried that 10 minutes was going to be too long. So I'm glad that the stuff was thought-provoking enough to give you time to talk. So someone from the defensiveness group, so could you share things that you recognized in those characteristics?
Okay, so I think Steve is getting his dog. We were looking at that, and we were kind of, you know, if you're feeling that it's very defensive, we were wondering, you know, is that more not necessarily the subject of the math, but more your teaching style then? And are we looking at how you're controlling your classroom,
Right.
rather than what you're teaching? You know, and I've been in a few different classrooms because I tutor, as well as I'm an adjunct for some corporate training stuff. But, you know, I've seen it in story problems. And I don't think it was intentional. It was more like, that's just kind of how they were.
Right.
And I don't think they meant any of it personally. You know, for example, someone said they were offended because he had used the word ginger for redheads. And apparently that's, you know, I had to look it up, but it's derogatory in different communities or things like that. So maybe they're feeling defensive in classrooms like that if some of his story problems are coming off that way. But yeah, I don't think it was an intentional thing always.
Right. And yeah, it is mostly not intentional. And you know what? I just realized how awkward it seems to talk about this stuff without it up and in front. So I'm going to, where's my thing here? Hold on. I'm going to share my screen on this. Okay, here I am. Done. I apologize, I should have done this initially. Okay. Okay, so this is the same thing that you have of the group characteristics. So right, we were talking about defensiveness, you know, and the organizational structure, and, you know, it's a good example with story problems in there, and possibly, you know, and so much of the stuff is inadvertent. You know, nobody goes into a classroom, you know, saying, I'm gonna offend a bunch of students today. You know, nobody wants to do that. But unfortunately, we end up doing that. And when I say we, I mean me. So I will talk specifically of myself. Okay. All right. So could somebody from the either or thinking group?
So we ended up talking about things less on the classroom side and more on the administrative side. So you've sometimes got this feeling in just general college culture of you've got people making decisions where it's like, this is the decision and that's it.
Right.
No room for really questioning the change in a program or the change in how classes are taught. And more specifically in the math side, you've got people who are like, no, the students have to take this course. So someone mentioned that they had one coworker who was aghast at the idea of students not taking calculus. Meanwhile, the rest of us are sitting here thinking most students don't need to take calculus just as a general thing. Don't pigeonhole them. And before we got broken out, I had started. There's one right way to do the math. And especially since I teach a lot of courses in statistics and probability stuff, it's like, well, I mean, there's wrong ways to do the math, but there's not necessarily a single right way to do the math. As long as it's valid, it works. It all depends on what rules you're running into. So yeah, that less in the classroom and more sort of the overarching what we're teaching, like what things are being presented, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. So in this either or thinking, you know, good, bad, right, wrong, difficult to learn from mistakes and conflict. You know, that idea of, you know, there's another one that's only one right way, which is another category, but, you know, that got brought up as well. In fear of open conflict, which is the next one, you know, it talks a lot in here about people in power. And so we have to think about who actually is in power in the situations we're in. So someone from the fear of open conflict group.
The fear of open conflict group seems to fear talking in the group.
Oh, okay. They have a fear of open conflict.
I'm not sure if that was us or not. I walked out of the room in the kitchen when you were assigning.
Oh, okay.
To join late, so we weren't really sure. I mean, we talked about, you know, we did talk about how students. I had a student who, you know, they think that they know the answer or whatever. They have a better way to teach. And they realize that when you're explaining to a class, you have to explain it several different ways so that a lot of different people understand, because a lot of people have different ways of learning. Or they think you're going too much into detail, and you're like, oh, all you have to do is this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, well, that's fine if you're in another class, but this is pre-algebra, and I need to break it down. And I said, okay, everybody raise their hand who understood what this student said. And nobody raised their hand. Maybe 3 people raised their hand, you know, out of the class of 30. So, you know, they have to understand that it's not all about them, that I'm teaching to a whole class. and they have to,
Sure.
so I'll tell them, be patient. And if you understand, fantastic.
Right.
You can help others, but
Yeah.
other than that, you just have to be understanding and be patient. And I have to go through it step by step. And, you know, and maybe if you get to something you don't understand, another student can help you.
Right.
Just
Exactly. Yeah.
everyone to feel comfortable when they're in my class. Nobody should be
Right.
afraid to ask questions or be afraid of what somebody else is going to say. It's like, this isn't high school, you know,
Right.
no bullying. We're all here to help each other. So that might be.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. See if there's something in the chat they need to. Okay. Awesome. I've got John, who is totally on top of everything, knows who's in the other groups. Okay. Oh, thank goodness John's on top of stuff. All right. So let's move to the individualism group and move this up here. So individualism, you know, discomfort working as part of a team. So maybe that, you know, helping other students situation might come into that, you know, accountability issues, leading to isolation. I think as, you know, math people, I think we are unique in STEM in our ability to actually do work in our field by ourselves. You know, if you think about science and engineering and other STEM fields, you know, there's a lot more group work that's necessary. And there isn't a lot of group work that's necessary in math, even though it does happen. And it happens a lot, but it isn't absolutely necessary. So there's that isolation part and competition. I don't know about you, I felt a lot of that myself. So the individualism group, so that would be April and David. One of you'd like to mention some of the things you've noticed.
I thought April was going to take this. Oh, you got it?
Okay.
No. Okay, well, that's fine. I can share out.
Okay.
We had talked about noticing individualism with both faculty and students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's obviously some students who they don't like to work in groups or partners or whatever. Some of that could be kind of a, you know, an ego thing where they just want to work on the problems themselves, and you know, they don't necessarily, you know, let's say if they're kind of a strong student, they may not want to you know, be kind of slowed down with students who are struggling. In some cases, you know, students may just kind of be a little antisocial, and they just don't want to be a part of a group, or they're shy, whatever, that kind of thing. They lack confidence. For faculty, we had talked about how you know, some faculty they may not want to, let's say, do the same things in their class that others that are teaching the same discipline are doing. So for example, if you have calculus teachers and, you know, they're all teaching, I don't know, fundamental theorem of, you know, one way, maybe another teacher doesn't want to teach it that way. Or, you know, if they're putting a specific, you know, question on their finals, at my school, you know, we don't have a department final. So, you know, maybe this teacher's like, well, I don't want to, you know, put that question on my final. I want to put something else.
Sure.
So that's kind of the crux of what we talked about.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. That's definitely, yeah, I noticed that a lot in my own classrooms, my own department environments, most definitely. All right, so I'm going to keep this rolling on because I'm also looking at my time too. So the objectivity group. So if someone would like to share out from there.
Yeah, so I know that I was assigned by my group members to say some things, so I'll gladly do that. But we talked about how, like, a lot of these beliefs of there being a neutral objective here, and that the goal is the right answer, or that there's only one way to think in a certain manner to get the answer, is something that a lot of students will have experienced in another course or another situation before coming into our class. And so therefore, it's even more important that we're vigilant in our own classes to make sure that our students are realizing that this is not okay, and this is not the way that it should be, and definitely not the way that it will be in our own classes.
Mhm. Yes, most definitely. Yeah, students most certainly come in with their own belief structures, and yeah, most definitely. Thank you, John. So I'm going to move on to the only one right way group, so we can keep moving. So someone from that group like to say something that came up in their discussions?
I was in that group at the only right way, along with Arlene. We got to recognize that we were neighbors here in Wisconsin. Nice connection right away. A couple of other Wisconsin people I see out here. Good to have you around today. We mostly talked about the student end of this because we didn't have time to get to others.
Okay.
But so often we hear a basic student question or direction, show me how to do this.
Right.
And implying that there is only one right way.
Mm-hmm.
And many times I feel like it's a shortcut out, looking for ways not to think, because if there's one way to do something, then I can do that and I don't ever have to think about it again.
Right.
So it runs so contrary to the way I feel about mathematics, which is that this is here to help us think and help us to look at things in different ways, to verify and confirm what we know to be true with further evidence, and all those alternate ways to try to do something can build strength rather than detract from anything, in my mind. Arlene pointed out a demonstration she saw at one conference with instructor having students do a simple problem task, but then share that on the board. The instructor would put one solution up, but then invite the students up to show other ways, more techniques. And I thought that was really strong to get that peer-to-peer from the student.
Absolutely.
Different approaches. Arlene, did you want to add anything in there?
Well, that's probably about all we got to. We spent a lot of time on the students and never talked about the other.
I would say, see this from our colleagues too, that in teaching approaches or just wanting to have one way to show something and expect it to work, and continually beat over that one method. And here, you didn't get this before, but let me show you again.
Right.
And it sounds like patience, but if you continually show the same thing that doesn't work, then what progress have we made?
Exactly.
Or the insistence in the curriculum that topic X has to be here. We can't learn Y if we don't already know X.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I think that, creativity that we have in problem solving, I don't think people see that enough. So that needs to be shown way more.
In fact, we work pretty hard to beat that out of people in the education system.
Yeah, I know, exactly. All right, so I'm going to move to the last one here, which is the paternalism group. So someone from the paternalism group, if you'd like to share some of your insights.
I'm not sure. Wait, I don't think we had that many groups, Lori.
Oh, we didn't? Okay, perfect. All right, so I will move back here. Okay, great. So thank you all for thinking about this and working on it, and thank you, kind of tying the stuff and sharing your experiences. So I promised that I would take these ideas and tie them together, right? This isn't just a bunch of characteristics that, I made up. So let me show you where they come from. And again, this comes from sociology research, and I am not a sociologist, but this is, oops, I'm going to stop this for a second real quick. Where I need to go. Okay. All right. All right. So this comes from a work by a sociologist, Tema Okun, who does a lot of really good work in anti-racism. And these were characteristics that she found of a white supremacy culture. And I was pretty shocked when I found a lot of this. And, but so many of them, and a lot of the ones that we didn't even discuss, just, I was just kind of bowled over at how I saw it at a college administrative level, in my own experience as a student, but even in my own experience as a faculty member. And these are characteristics of white supremacy culture that show up in these organizations. And culture is so powerful because it's present and at the same time so difficult to define. And, when I started thinking about the culture we were showing in our classrooms and the culture that students were coming into our classrooms expecting in some ways, I had to realize that it's actually a part of the larger white supremacist patriarchal culture that we live in. Which, I mean, it sounds harsh, it sounds shocking, but it's true. And, I will make sure that John has the link to this so that it gets posted on the site. But I really encourage you to, read this stuff with an open mind. And maybe, you're not necessarily at a point where you can think about it in the classroom environment, but think about it in terms of your own, college and department structures. Think about academia and how you operate in that space. So, where this comes from. All right, hold on. Something. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Stephen. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop here and let's move on back into my presentation. All right, so we've kind of established that the math culture we have, right? I went through, all my programs and everything thinking, oh, there was no culture, right? We just teach the math and there's nothing else there, but there is a culture. And the bad news is that it's a culture of, patriarchal white supremacy. So where does this move us? Move here. So this moves into looking at the story problems. And I was going to have you go into another breakout room for these, but I think in the interest of time, we will just look at them together. But, again, I didn't promise any easy answers at the beginning of this. What I hope at the end is that you see more of the problem that we actually face. So here's a problem, and all of these problems actually come out of the pre-algebra book when I teach that course. Payments on a credit card. So you make charges and you make payments. And, I want you to think for a moment about what that might say to a student. What that says to a student who's of low socioeconomic class, a student of color, someone who doesn't necessarily have the means, for whom, $73.50 really is a lot of money. And all of these things is a lot of money. And even just the issue of money in general. I mean, money is, these are great examples for problems. People need to use these things. But what I invite you to do is to step back for a moment and think about how a student might feel. about these. How a student might feel about a problem that deals with debt and credit. And just to be aware of that. You know, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do these problems. These are great problems to do. But take a moment and think about how the student feels and really having the student centered and minority students specifically. So the next one has to do with the sales associate driving. And how many miles did he drive? So, you know, I think one obvious issue is assuming the sales associate is a dude. That, you know, that's one thing. And what I've done is I actually do snippets of this talk when I teach some of my classes. So when we do story problems, we actually do a social breakdown of the problem. Like, what are the norms that are actually being discussed here? What is the assumption? How could this be done differently? And we do a whole breakdown of this before we even do the problem. And so, you know, thinking about business, thinking about the sales associate, thinking, you know, it's so much of this patriarchal culture. And again, not necessarily every problem has to have she or they or, you know, other identifiers of gender in there. But, you know, take a moment and think about the different options and how could we change this to make it student-centered and truly student-centered in these scenarios. So my next one has to do with the Torres family going on vacation. You know, this one really struck me because of, you know, people having the privilege to even take a vacation and the driving. And, you know, when I talked about this in my pre-algebra class, you know, there was a big discussion about having a car, like having a car to do that driving. That was, you know, that was a big discussion that came up among my students. And again, it's not a bad problem. None of these are bad problems, but we do show cultural norms in these problems. These problems are not, you know, devoid of standards. We are showing something in them. And the next one, oh, this is one I really like in terms of problem solving methods. So this is Tom and Dick at the steel mill, and Tom having every 6th night off, Dick having every 8th night off. And, you know, this was actually in the section, so again, this came from my pre-algebra class. This was in the section on least common multiples. So you can kind of see where that comes in. But the interesting thing was, when I had my students do this problem, so, you know, I usually do the typical think, pair, share, where students, you know, read the problem, try it themselves, talk to, you know, their neighbor, them. Not a single group did this problem using least common multiples. They all did them, and there's a few different ways that came up that were consistent, but not a single person used the topic that was actually discussed in the section. And, you know, I was fine with that. You know, there isn't just one way to solve things, but I think if this problem was given in the same class with a different instructor, I'm not sure that things would have worked out that way. Or if this problem just showed up without pedagogical context on a test. You know, I mean, we see where we'd use least common multiples as one possible, you know, method, but, you know, how's that obvious to students? Or is it not even a problem that it's not obvious to students, but there's other things going on? And okay, I think this is my last one. So my last one of these about buying peanuts and cashews. And again, you know, talked about this one with my pre-algebra class. And what was interesting about this problem was all my students You know, one of the complaints students have about story problems is that they're not relevant, right? It's not real situations, right? These aren't real things that they have to be careful about. And, oops, I'm supposed to see something, I think. And the problem here in this particular one that I thought was really interesting is that this situation really happened to me. For my last birthday, a faculty member at the college, not in math, but another department, who rarely talks to me, walked up to me and gave me this bag. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, happy birthday. I'm like, that's great, awesome. And I look in the bag and it is literally a bag of nuts. And I'm like, really? What is this about? And so it was interesting when this problem actually came up with my students and they said, this doesn't happen. Who buys a whole bunch of peanuts and cashews? Like, Gary Fleming, the guy who bought me nuts for my birthday, does this. So, you know, again, being able to have those conversations about, you know, lighthearted conversations about when does this really happen? Is this really relevant? You know, it doesn't have to be something that has very precise data. And so sharing these situations. So some other approaches to kind of really foster true student belonging. Here's some other really good work that's done. Desmos is, you know, obviously awesome. Joe Bowler does some good work, but definitely focused more on the K-12 folks. Flip down to the story problem, Mad Libs or something I've done a lot. I don't do them quite so much now because it's really, I feel like more the structure of the problems and what they're all about is contributing to part of this issue and not just the names and things in there, but there can be some fun things in that. And one big one is rehumanizing mathematics. Rochelle Gutierrez and Brian, I can't remember his last name, they have a grant and doing a lot of work on the Rehumanizing Mathematics project. And a lot of that is focused not just on student inclusion, but on really making a culture that people from marginalized groups feel welcome in math and feel like they can bring their entire selves and their whole humanity while they're doing math. And I think I'm up to this point here. So again, let's take a step back. And, you know, I always thought, and a lot of people thought, there is no culture in math, right? We take all this stuff out and we don't show, you know, it's just all the numbers and we don't have a culture. But the thing is, we do, right? I mean, that's my point of this. You know, we do have a culture and it's white supremacist culture. And most times it's very subtle and it's not pointed out. But other times there's things like this. And, you know, I had someone in my department who actually gave this to students. And you can look it up online. It's this whole thing. It's couched in humor, but it's not humorous because it is horrible and offensive. And it's something called the East LA Math Test. And these are just a couple of the problems that are on there. But, you know, if there are people who are doing this, when the person in my department actually gave this out, a lot of the reaction other people came up with was, well, he's just trying to be funny. It's just a poor, you know, a joke that's in poor taste. There were all these excuses, but, you know, think about how a student would feel seeing this. And then, not on top of just seeing this, being given this by a person in power, right? I mean, if we are a group that has stuff like this that exists, and it's our responsibility to stand up and decry it and stop this, not just say, oh, it's a joke. We have a responsibility to stop things like this. because it's just awful. I got a feeling I am so out of time. Hold on. So what are some really tangible things you can do to help students bring their full selves? I noticed that last question I had in your breakout about naming an activity to bring you joy. And that's something I've started doing with my students. Ask them to name something that brings them joy, and then talk about how they can calculate or count or quantify anything in that, and then share that with their neighbors. And, you know, I don't get a lot of really, really complicated math out of it, but what I do get is really authentic math that makes students feel like they belong. They are really invested in these problems. And sometimes someone else brings up something else and they, you know, ping pong ideas back and forth, but it's not that sense of I'm being forced to do this. This is something that they want. And that, in a lot of ways, that makes all the difference. So, some takeaways in here. So I'm finishing up. So don't be a jerk. I think we all know that. Check your biases. If you're treating all students as equal, you're not doing enough. And that's the point of equity. Equity is not making everybody equal. Equity is giving students what they need in order to succeed. And most certainly, listen to students. Let them have a voice. So here's some work that I cited in here again to be aware of. So session FAM, data. Rebecca Renard Wilson, I went to the Association for Women in Mathematics workshop back in January, and that was where I first saw the Tema Okun white supremacy work. And she was talking about it more as a culture in academia and math departments. So, you know, I'm kind of taking it into a different realm here, but that was where I first saw that. So if, you know, so Rebecca does a lot of anti-racism research, specifically, I think she lives in Los Angeles, so it's definitely a good person to look up. And then obviously Matt Voigt, he's probably the only one I know who's actually doing data measuring the LGBT population in math. You would think, you know, it really surprised me, you would think out of anybody in the queer community who would want to be all about data, it would be queer mathematicians, right? Like me. But no, we don't have data on that. So Matt is doing some really good work on this as well. All right, so I think I am finished. So I'm gonna stop sharing here. All right, okay. So questions. I'm gonna ask if people will raise a Zoom hand. Maybe, and that might keep people from talking over each other. Okay, yeah, Stephanie, can I unmute you? Can I lower your hand?
I think I unmuted myself.
Okay, awesome.
So you were talking about how you ask students to name an activity that brings them joy and share that. Do you then like flesh out these activities? Do you use those, do you create examples based on that later in your class, or is it just one activity in which people are reflecting on how they may use mathematics in their life?
I haven't gotten to that yet, but I am, because I'm definitely noticing a lot of themes. In the pandemic, there's a lot of binge watching and a lot of working out. So, you know, as I notice themes, that's something that I definitely want to move toward. But one thing I want to stay away from is a situation where students don't feel centered. You know, we can think that we know all kinds of stuff about students and then start saying, students all love Netflix. And then lo and behold, at some point, students start to hate Netflix. And so I want to always stay humble and remember that I don't know what they want. And my whole point is I don't care what they're into. I want them to be into something that they feel like they can bring into class. It's a little late.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Gary.
Okay, could you give me the name of that? What was that woman's name? Tema.
Tema Okun. Let me put it in the chat. Actually, somebody put the PDF in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, dismantling racism. And here is the URL. Yep. And so it is Tema Okun.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. I'm gonna lower your hand too. Okay. Oh. Other questions? And I can also hang out after too if, you know, John keeps the room open. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
yeah, let me at least stop the recording
Okay.
here.